Hello, good evening and welcome to a special edition of Biz First in Focus. Our guest tonight is that senior banker, former chairman of the Bank of Ceylon and a public interest activist, Mr. Rusipala Tenakun. Good evening to you, Mr. Rusipala.
Good evening, Paras.
And thank you very much for being on Biz Focus. Yes. And our other guest tonight is our very own Newsfirst, Chaturanga Haporachi. Good evening to you, Chaturanga.
Good evening, Paras.
Now then, I thought I'll ask you first of all, can you just tell me as simply as possible, what on earth is a national payment platform?
Yes, Paras. Now, the topic that we're about to discuss is definitely a complex matter. Like when we started talking about the bond issue, for example, both of you were involved in talking about it. It was very complex at the start. And now, 1.5 or 2 years later, we see how severe the problem was. Similarly, the national payment platform that we are about to discuss is a system where all state institutions, the Inland Revenue Department, the Customs Department, the Colombo Municipal Council, the Yara National Wild Park, all these institutions will be brought into one digital platform where the general public can carry out transactions with them. If you owe them money, you can pay it via telephone on an online method. That is the national payment platform that we are discussing.
So you go on your laptop, you go on your tab, your smartphone.
This is the simplest form of putting the national payment platform.
I see. So you can even buy your tickets to Yala.
Yes, yes.
Wonderful. So it's actually a good thing.
Definitely a good thing. As long as this comes under the supervisory and regulatory role of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka.
You've just snatched away my next question, which was going to be, who supervises and guarantees the safety of my credit card details, my debit card details?
For us, there are two laws that have been put in place in our country, the Monetary Law, of course, and the Payments and Settlements Act of 2005, number 28 of 2005, where the Act says that if a payment system is being planned or implemented, that should be directly under the supervisory and regulatory role of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka.
And Mr. Rusipala, as far as you know and are aware, does the Republic of Sri Lanka have anything close to something like a Data Protection Act or a privacy law?
No. That's a very important question, very relevant to the issue now we are discussing. We don't have a secrecy protection or privacy protection law and a digital storage law, data storage law.
Data
protection law. That is not that. That is one of the important requirements, because in the national payment platform, going beyond the payments in between government departments to the government departments, among the citizens, it can also go beyond overseas also.
Yes, indeed.
It can be connected to overseas because the technology is so advanced, and in some countries it is operated for transferring of funds to any destination of your desire.
Yes.
So therefore such laws are very important.
Indeed, the reason I asked you whether there is any laws in place to protect one's privacy in terms of the data that is being held by whoever on you is because obviously when you use your credit card, correct me if I'm wrong, Chaturanga, when you use your debit or credit card or your payment card, a charge card, any kind of card that you can use for payment, you necessarily are parting with some information.
Definitely.
And currently, there is some limited amount of transactions allowed, I think, with the customs, is there? Am I right?
Yes, for us there is a system called the ASICUDA, the automated system for custom data that the Sri Lanka Custom uses. This is an international system like the RAMIS in the Inland Revenue Department.
Yeah.
However, this system has certain limitations. The system can do transactions only through two state banks,
right.
the People's Bank and the Bank of Ceylon.
Right.
Now, the customs contacted the central bank back in 2016 and asked them whether they could make the system wider and get all the commercial banks also into the system. And when this system was being put in place by the central bank through Lanka Clear, which is a private company owned partly by the central bank and the commercial banks, including the state banks, this is where things get a bit messy.
This is where it sort of becomes a bit discolored, is it?
Yes, it goes from white to grey all of a sudden, and the ICTA comes in, and the ICTA by this time says that they also want to create a system, a national payment platform, and then from that point onwards it's all grey.
Now then, and this is where I need to bring in Mr. Rusipala. Mr. Rusipala, the act that now regulates and permits these payments is very specific, isn't it? The regulatory authority envisaged in the act is who?
Yeah, it's a central bank, no doubt.
Right.
But then I think we must trace at this point, to make things clear, a bit of history of this national payments part.
Indeed.
What happened in the country. Firstly, in the early 2000, the central bank wanted to outsource the check clearing system among the banks. The banks had a system for clearing checks.
Indeed.
I mean, it was a very voluminous operation.
So that's
you carry physically
all
checks, and then they wanted to outsource this.
Right.
So they set up a company called Lanka Clear Private Limited.
Correct.
That company was set up with the shareholdings, 50% shares being held by the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, and other 50% by the commercial banks, all the commercial banks in Sri Lanka, including state banks. And towards, say, 4 or 5 years later, with the onset of the technology advancements and with the intervention of the influence of the Bank for International Settlements, for countries, banking systems have to advance with the technology. So they influence the banks to fall in line and then follow certain systems. Then this need for national payment platforms came in.
Right.
And in order to do that, in order to yield to that requirement, country passed this act which Chaturanga spoke of just now. That is this Act number 28 of 2005. That act is called the National Payment and Settlement Act. So now that act will clearly says what is envisaged in the national platform system, payment system. Now central bank, in addition to the outsourcing of the clearing, they have the RTGS system, that is the real-time gross settlement system. If you want to transfer monies, it is the central bank that comes in to play the role. Now this Lanka Clear Private Limited, at one stage, after they took over the check clearing thing, the entire process was automated. So they were geared to handle this on a high-tech basis. Instead of carrying the checks physically, I mean, they were doing it on an automated basis. And they also developed, going into this system of falling in line with the requirements of the government to set up a national payment platform. So therefore they were developing their own systems. That is where Chaturanga said, that the customs was brought in, the inland revenue was brought in, and these inter-organizational, interdepartmental transactions were permitted. But what must be remembered is, while the payments were monitored and conducted and operated by Lanka Clear Private Limited, the entire operation was controlled and regulated by the Central Bank of Sri Lanka.
Thank you.
For obvious reasons.
Thank you, Mr. Rusipala. And time to take a short commercial break. Don't go away. Do come back. On the other side of this break, we have more details. And welcome back to Biz First in Focus. Mr. Rusipala Tenakon. Now, obviously, now you've given us the history of this, and it's very clear that the central bank was going to be the regulator and take on the role of the guardian of all this information, the data, the integrity of the transactions, and the safety of the public's monies. And ensuring, of course, that it didn't sort of fly away to unknown parts of Africa or wherever it is that these all these bad deeds happen. Anyway, so where then is the controversy? Chaturanga?
Yes, for us what happens is, as we spoke earlier, the grey area that we spoke of after the ICTA gets involved in this. Now, the central bank, as we said, has to have the regulatory and supervisory role in all of this that is happening.
Especially because there is no Data Protection Act in place, there is no privacy laws in place.
Simply for us, because this is what is stated in the Act itself.
Right.
That is why the central bank should, because this is violating the Act of the country, a law of the country. So the ICTA comes in and they discuss our national payment platform. Then they come and make a presentation at the central bank saying this is...
Who asked them to do this? Were they being reactive, proactive? What
no,
were
they were actually asked to do this by a deputy governor at the central bank, Somasiri, if I'm not mistaken. P. Samarasiri was the person who had asked the ICTA to get involved in this. So the ICTA comes in and they do a presentation regarding the national payment platform.
Yeah.
The Governor of the central bank, Dr. Indrajit Kumaraswamy, says that the presentation, the details provided in this presentation is not enough, and they require a written document as well with regard to the national payment platform.
Right.
They discuss a committee that will be put in place by the ICTA, but the people who will be in this committee are not discussed at any point. But however, Mohandan Kanage, the CEO of ICTA, appoints a committee with 14 people.
Who is it who asked the ICTA to appoint this committee? Were the central bank aware of it?
No. From the documentation that we have received so far regarding the national payment platform...
Can I do a small clarification?
Yes.
The central bank proactively taking steps forward based on the act that was passed in the country in 2005, appointed what is called a National Payment Council.
Right.
Now, National Payment Council was comprising of a deputy governor of the central bank, a director, the commercial bank representatives. What they were doing was, they were preparing a plan, a national plan to set up this national payment platform or payment system. Now, they did a roadmap, and as a part of the roadmap, they were in the process of introducing stepwise how the government, the country should move forward in bringing in high-tech transfers, electronic fund transfer systems under the authority of the central bank. Just to tell you one example, they announced that by 2018, that is in the roadmap of the National Payment Council, as a part of their work, they announced that the credit cards by 2018 or debit cards should necessarily contain a chip.
I see.
And that was a requirement. I mean, this was the line in which the central bank, being the regulatory authority for fund transfers, whether it is electronic or otherwise, for settlements among banks, that is the final authority. So that is the line in which they were progressing towards the setting up of this national payment system.
Right.
Now, in between, now ICTA is an organization that is set up by the Ministry of Telecommunications.
Right.
It has nothing to do with the central bank, and the act does not refer anything or make any reference to a technology ministry or a telecommunication ministry to play a role in this. But the act is specifically mentioning that the central bank should get involved and the financial sector should get involved for one obvious reason, because the whole system envisages the financial stability of the country in the end. Therefore, the financial stability is a thing that has to be ensured by bodies that are connected legally and operationally in the financial field.
Right.
That is the central bank and the commercial banks. For that reason, the coming in of the intrusion of the ICTA into this phenomenon, into this activity, is a total, I think, I don't know, I should say intruding into an area where it was not meant for them.
Now, I want to come back to this point, Chaturanga. The governor of the central bank, Dr. Kumaraswamy, has actually written to the Minister of Finance, has he not?
Yes.
Are you aware of what he says?
Yes, for us, the governor says some clear points about what he wants done in the national payment platform. He lays out, firstly he says that the committee that has been appointed, the committee that I was talking about, appointed by the CEO of ICTA, was never discussed with the central bank. That the central bank is unaware of a 14-member committee like this. He says that according to the national payment platform proposal, the central bank is not a stakeholder in this whole proposed system. So that is a point that we should remember when we go along. The central bank governor says that the central bank is not even a stakeholder in this proposed national payment platform.
As proposed by ICTA.
As proposed by the ICTA. He also speaks of data storage that we have been speaking right throughout. He says that there is no law in the country, a privacy act to protect the the data that will be stored in a cloud server if it has to be. So these are some concerning points raised by the governor of the central bank.
But the governor does make the point that although they had discussions, that there was no decision made for the ICTA to form a committee.
Definitely, that is his first point, in fact, for us in the letter. And what is more concerning is that this was sent to the finance minister at the time, Minister Ravi Karunanayake. Then the governor is very clear in saying in his letter, if you go along, that any payment system that is being made in the country should be under the role of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. In other words, if you take a look at it, he's saying that the national payment platform proposal that has been produced is not accordance to the law of the country. That's what he's saying.
And on that note, we shall take another break. Don't go away. We'll be back shortly. And welcome back to a special edition of Biz First in Focus. Now then, Chaturanga and Mr. Rusipala Tennakoon. So this is an interesting tale. The ICTA have set up their own a 14-member committee, even though the meetings previously envisaged an 11-member committee. There was no decision made, but lo and behold, the central bank perhaps puzzled when they received notification that a 14-member committee has been set up, and the governor of the central bank deems it fit to write back to the minister. Now then, I want to know this, Mr. Rusipala, what does the Minister of Finance have any sort of legitimacy to speak to the other banks and so on? Because especially the state banks are not under the Minister of Finance.
This is a complete violation of something that is enacted and enforced in this country. If you permit me to read this section, the first one of this act, it says that the central bank shall be the authority responsible for the preparation of a plan of a national payment system. What more?
It sounds rather clear to me.
This is not the preamble, this is the body of the act. So what the governor of the central bank has done is nothing strange. He has seen a clear violation of an act that for which he is responsible for the planning stage, from the planning stage. Therefore, it is right, nothing but right, for him to raise this issue with the people whom he thinks have violated this.
Now then, Chaturanga, you've been doing some investigations into this matter, and are you quite comfortable carrying out these investigations? Are you, in terms of now right to information? But then there's this media standards bill
that we're discussing.
Is there? Does it concern you in your investigative role?
In fact, for us, the point that we've discussed on Face the Nation as well regarding the revelation of sources when it comes to this media council, for us, a point that was raised at that discussion was that we'll never reveal our sources. So we have received a lot of documents with regard to the national payment platform, and one document that I received was a letter sent by the finance minister at the time, Ravi Karunanayake, to all the CEOs of commercial banks. Now this letter has another interesting point. Now the point here is that, as Mr. Tennakoon very correctly mentioned, The central bank falls under the Ministry of National Policy and Economic Development under the Prime Minister of our country, Ranil Wickremesinghe. The commercial banks fall under the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. The ICTA falls under the Ministry of Telecommunication and Digital Infrastructure Development. The Finance Minister has no role to play in this whole incident. However, we find a letter.
Yes, sorry, carry on.
Yeah, we find a letter sent by the Finance Minister to the CEOs of commercial banks asking that the ICTA has developed a system called the National Payment Platform and that they have to integrate their software accordingly before the 1st of November 2016. As Mr. Tennakon pointed out, this is once again a violation.
So this is the Finance Ministry and ICTA parachuting into some territory where they are not invited.
Definitely. And this goes beyond that for us. So 2 weeks after this letter was sent, on the 11th of October 2016, the Director of Payments and Settlements at the Central Bank also sends a letter to the CEOs of commercial banks saying that the Central Bank has made a system together with the Lanka Clear and the commercial banks, and that the system was tested successfully, and they have also asked the commercial banks to join this particular system.
They were ready to take off.
They were ready to
virtually ready to take off.
So who was responsible
and with the sanction of the Central Bank, and with the Central Bank being a stakeholder, what more safety the Central Bank has to ensure in a financial transaction for us? The safety, the security and the reliability. And there are so many other factors like the confidentiality and such things coming into play of those who participate in the transaction. What about the other things? Now in fund transfers, you have terrorist funding activities going on in the world. You have money laundering going on in the world. You have drug monies being transacted here and there. Who is the authority who will finally give or take the responsibility for funds, payments transferred through these sources with the responsibility that they should hold to the government and to the authorities that be? It can only be a financial institution governed by other laws like the Banking Acts, like the Bills of Exchange Acts, like this Monetary Board, the Monetary Act of Central Bank. I mean, there should be some financial institutions, not a private company brought in from somewhere just to handle these things. It is not a simple thing as that.
And I want to ask you this, Chaturanga. We got slightly sidetracked with the media standards thing, but the purpose of asking you that was, when you carried out your investigations, fearlessly as you say, without reference to any possibility of having to reveal your sources, who are the shareholders of this other company as proposed by ICTA?
Yes, for us, there is a problem there as well. Now, the ICTA is not an institution that has anything to do with the financial sector.
Right.
This is an institution that falls solely with the information technology sector of our country, the future of our country basically. Now, the ICTA comes forward and says that they have selected 3 service providers as part of the one end, a digital instructions provider for the National Payment Platform. The question here is, can the ICTA do something like that? How were these companies selected? If they are saying 3 were selected, what was the procedure that they were selected? One selected company is a company identified as Total Pay. I managed to get hold of the prospectus of Total Pay as well. Now, what the company says is that they have been awarded the right to operate as a digital instruction provider by the Information Communication Technology Agency, or ICTA. Now, we are talking of the national payment platform of the country. The right to operate has been given to them by the ICTA. So, there is a problem there. It's evident to anybody.
Yes, so that because they are not the appointing authority.
No, they have to reach agreements. Operational systems has to be agreed upon in keeping with the requirements of the monetary laws.
Right.
Now, can the ICTA do that with this private company?
In financial cases and institutions and transactions, what is the one thing that is the most important?
I mean, you should be able to offer the the security, the reliability, the confidentiality,
And
all
the trust.
this. Trust is definitely the basic factor.
So the trust, we can settle on trust as being the primary factor here. I think that's all, unfortunately, for
Can I add one more point for us?
Very quickly.
Very quickly. Yes, now we've been following the actions of the ICTA for a long time. You and I were seated at a press conference organized by Minister Harin Fernando as the Digital Instructions Infrastructure Minister. He said that for the Google Loon project that we discussed about 6 months ago, that taxpayers' money was not spent.
That's right.
You were also there with me.
That.
But we received a document for us to say that 9.8 million rupees was spent on the launch of the event at the Temple Trees back in 2015.
Do we know who paid the 9.8 million?
What we have to ask the minister is, are these not taxpayer money? That's the only question that we have to ask.
Wonderful. Chaturanga Hapwarachi, thank you very much. It's been most interesting talking to you. And Mr. Risipala Tenakun, of course, it's been wonderful talking to you and giving us your knowledge. Thank you very much. And that's about it for Biz First in Focus. Take care. Good night.